Good day, Black Knight scholars. Mr. Deegan back for another edition of VidNotes videos. We are on Unit 6, Industrialization and Imperialism, and today we will study Lesson 5. We're going to talk about European imperialism in the 1800s. It is a time when European countries stretch across the continent of Africa, much like this British man Cecil Rhodes is doing in this cartoon. More about him later. And we're also going to be talking about China, India, and Japan. How does Western Europe try to dominate these areas of the world? Let's back up and define this I word. What is imperialism? It is the domination of one country over another territory. And within the word imperial, you see empire. And the goal of an imperial power was to build an empire so that you could control a place. How is imperialism in the 1800s the same as the age of exploration of the 1500s? We've been talking about that in previous units. Well, what makes these two periods of history similar is Christian missionary efforts. But how is imperialism in the 1800s different than in the age of exploration 300 years before? Well, the difference is the Industrial Revolution in Europe. Factories grow in Europe, and there is demand for cotton, coal, and other raw materials. And there's also demand for markets to sell the finished products that come from these factories. So, industrialization makes this time different. And as I was saying, the real cause, the Industrial Revolution changed the game. Now, there are two new reasons for European imperialism, and they can be summed up by the M and M's. Raw materials that go into the factory, and markets to sell products from the factory. Industrial nations in Europe needed natural resources and markets to expand their economies, and these nations competed to control and dominate Africa and Asia in order to secure their own economic and political success. However, resistance to imperialism, and there was resistance, took many forms, including armed conflict and intellectual movements, fighting with ideas. Why did European countries and businessmen think it was okay to dominate Africa and Asia? This man is Charles Darwin. He is an English scientist, and you might have heard of his theories in science class. Social Darwinism. That was the idea of the survival of the fittest. And European countries, leaders, and businessmen applied Darwin's scientific theories to societies. They said certain groups of people are better or are more likely to survive than other groups. The best adapted groups will survive, according to this theory and interpretation of Darwin. And Europeans conquering the world is natural, according to this train of thought. The dodo bird died off and became extinct because it couldn't adapt, and so too will people, so too will inferior cultures. The Europeans thought of themselves as the superior culture that would survive. That was a part of the mindset of these European countries and leaders coming in and dominating. That's how they were able to sleep well at night, thinking they were superior. What are the three types and forms of imperialism? Number one, you have colony. A colony is when a mother country has total control of a territory. And here's the continent of Africa. Many European countries set up colonies in Africa during this time. The second type of imperialism is a protectorate. A protectorate is where a mother country only has partial control over a region. And Egypt was an example of a protectorate. It could have its own military, but it did not have complete control of a government. And the third form of imperialism was a sphere of influence. A sphere of influence was when a mother country has exclusive trading rights. In China, there were different European countries that had spheres of influence so that they could enrich themselves through trade. But China had its own government, it had an independent military, it could not be told what to do. Let's talk about the continent of Africa in the 1800s. When all of these different European powers start coming in, it's known as the scramble for Africa. When did they start coming in? Why did they do so? It comes down to a conference in Berlin, Germany. The year is 1884. The leader of this conference is this man, Otto von Bismarck, who unified Germany. Well, he organizes a conference which prompted or started the scramble for Africa. All of the major European powers attended. England, France, Germany, Austria, Italy, Russia, Spain, the Ottoman Empire. And these leaders determined how they would divide up the continent of Africa into colonies. And you see in this political cartoon, Bismarck with the knife cutting up the pie that is Africa. The interesting thing about this is no African representatives were invited to this meeting. African countries and their leaders had no say in how their own country would be divided up among the European powers. An example that shows the scramble for Africa. Here is Cecil Rhodes. He is a British businessman and he is interested in getting rich. He explores Africa, especially the southern part of Africa where there are diamond mines, and this would be present-day Zambia and Zimbabwe. And he is an example of an imperialist, and he uses his wealth to create his own colony. He calls it Rhodesia, after himself, and he finds diamonds in this region, and today 60% of the world's diamonds come from this company and this area where Cecil Rhodes explored. He made a lot of money doing this. Also, European imperialism led to the building of the Suez Canal to improve trade. Here is the Suez Canal in the northeast corner of Africa, the Mediterranean Sea, the Red Sea. Here is Egypt and the Nile River, and the canal connects the Mediterranean to the Red Sea. The Suez Canal was finished in 1869 by the Frenchman Ferdinand de Lesseps, and the Suez Canal was owned by the French for 99 years. Why was the Suez Canal so important to trade and the age of imperialism? The Suez Canal connected Europe to India and the rest of Asia. So let's trace this blue line. This is the route a ship might take using the Suez Canal. You can go right through the Mediterranean to the Red Sea and out to the Indian Ocean. Before the Suez Canal, you had to go all the way around the continent of Africa, much like Vasco da Gama did, to get to the Indian Ocean and to India and the rest of Asia. And the Suez Canal reduced the distance it took to get from Europe to Asia by 43%. Rather than taking 24 days, it took only 14 days. This was a game changer in trade in Europe and Asia.